皆さんこんにちは。Hi everybody, thank you for being here today. This is No Nukes Action 94th, the 11th of every month against the nuclear power plant, against nuclear weapons, and then today also against Tokyo Olympics and Paralympics. The Tokyo Olympics was invited by former Prime Minister Abe's obvious lie. He wanted to hide the Fukushima's old trouble and then show off to the world the fake triumph of covering those Fukushima disaster. But he had to postpone it 1 year because of COVID-19 pandemics. But pandemic isn't over, and many cities in Japan under the state of emergency. So how Japan and the IOC can open Tokyo Olympic on July 23rd, which is 6 more weeks away. So here we have speak out from Steve Zelter.
Thank you, Chizu, and we're here again at the Japanese Consulate to demand against the restarting of the nuclear plants in Japan, and also the denialism. I mean, the government of Japan, Abe and now Suga, have denied that there's even a crisis in Fukushima, even though there's over 1 million tons of water contaminated water that they want to dump into the Pacific Ocean. So this history of denialism is not new. Japan denied the situation of the comfort women, that they had sexual slaves. They denied that they were going to lose the war. Millions of people died as a result of denialism. And the latest denialism of the Japanese government is the danger of having the Olympics in the middle of a pandemic. You have to be really insane, frankly, in my view, to have an Olympics in the middle of a pandemic, when people are suffering, when the Japanese doctors and nurses have demanded that they cancel the Olympics. Doctors have even said there may be a new Olympic variant that may come out of having the Olympics with all thousands of people from all around the world. And why? Why would they want to have an Olympics in the middle of a pandemic? You have to ask that. People have to ask that in Japan and around the world. Well, what it is profits. They make business from the Olympics. The companies make business. In fact, the companies themselves are fighting with each other. The latest development is the minister is saying that he's blaming NEC because of a $65 million contract. They want more money. It's all about money, making money in the Olympics. But they're not going to have any visitors. People are blocked from going into Japan. You have to have a quarantine to go in Japan. Imagine that. You have a quarantine to go into the country and they're still going to have the Olympics. The great danger now is that bringing together thousands of people from around the world could spread the virus, but they really don't care that people are dying. The 80% of the people of Japan are against the Olympics, but they're still going ahead with it. People are being contaminated. People are dying in their homes. People aren't able to go to the hospital. They haven't been able to get the vaccine out properly, but they're not interested in that. Making the Olympics happen as a priority over lives. That's what we're saying. And unfortunately, the United States and the G7, which are meeting today, are in favor of the Olympics. So the U.S. government, Biden administration, Nancy Pelosi, who is in San Francisco, they're in favor of supporting the Olympics in the middle of a pandemic. We have to say our priority is protecting people, protecting lives. Our priority is health care, stopping the money for the Olympics, stopping the money for military, more military transports, more military equipment. Give that money to people who need health care. In the midst of this pandemic, people still do not have national health care in the United States and in California. People are suffering because of the lack of health care. We have to say that that the right of people to survive and have a decent life is a priority. People need to have a decent life, an environmental safe life. And for the people of Japan who are careful with their health and with foods, how could you, first of all, allow an Olympics with COVID in the middle of it when people are going to be contaminated? And people have said if there's a new COVID variant, this will be known as the COVID Olympics, the variant COVID Olympic variant. Is that something that Japan and Japanese people want to hear about? That Japan government, the capitalists in Japan went ahead with holding the Olympics even though it would lead to a development of a variant of the COVID? And I think that this is a long history. And the other thing that our committee was formed over was the Fukushima meltdowns. And despite the fact that they still haven't removed the melted nuclear rods from Fukushima, they want to open up more nuclear plants. Japan, like California, is on the very dangerous areas because of earthquakes. So you don't build nuclear plants. You don't build nuclear plants that could end up exploding, not having proper protection, and I don't believe that you can have proper protection. I remember that when I first went to that plant in above Fukushima, what was that plant? Onagawa. We went to visit it, and they saw that I was an American, so they said, "Oh, well, we have a special pamphlet for English speakers. We'll give it to you." So they gave me this pamphlet with pictures of what they've learned from the meltdown of Fukushima, Onagawa, because they wanted to continue. It was flooded, but it wasn't contaminated. So I looked at the pamphlet, and one of the pictures that they had with the caption was, "What you should do if there's an earthquake is hold on to the handlebars they installed, so you wouldn't be knocked down by an earthquake, another earthquake." Can you imagine that? That this is one of the lessons learned in Japan to protect from an earthquake and a nuclear plant, hold on to the handlebars, as if that's going to protect the plant from going up in an explosion. Hold on to the handlebars. This is insane. This is really insanity, and it continues. That is the problem that we have in this country, in this world. Why is this insanity continuing despite the pandemic? This is the worst pandemic in 100 years. In Japan, the Japanese government, while they have a high priority to have the Olympics, have not had a high priority to protect the health care of the people of Japan. They've not said that this is an emergency national disaster. It's the greatest disaster for health in 100 years in the world, this pandemic, that the government has a low priority. Vaccines, the distribution of vaccines, the health care, making sure there are enough nurses and doctors in hospitals, that has not been a priority. That's why the doctors are overworked, the nurses are overworked, people are dying. People are dying here and died here. People are dying in Japan because there's a lack of proper health care. And yet the priority of the government is to have the Olympics. And think about when the Olympics is going to be held. Next month we're going to have another rally here on the 23rd when the Olympics starts. The Olympics is being held at the hottest time of the year in Japan, in which heat prostration can take place among the sports participants. Now, I mean, you've got the COVID crisis, and then you have heat dangers for the athletes. Why are they having it in July? Why? Why would they have it at the hottest time of the month when athletes will be outside running and outside? And the reason is money. Because NBC does not want the Olympics to compete with sports in the summer. They don't want to have it in October because it'll compete with sports in October. That's the reason they have it in July. So this whole operation, this whole scheme and scandal of the Olympics is because to protect money and making money. But actually, the Olympics disaster in Japan is going to cost money. It's costing lives and it's costing money. And we have to say people before profits. We have to say stop the nukes now. We have to say no more Olympics in the middle of a pandemic. We have to protect people's lives. That is our priority. And obviously not the priority of the government of Japan. And let's say stop it now, stop the Olympics now. Thank you.
So this Japanese government are totally denying the voice of the people, crushing down the voice of the majority of people. That has been continuing in Japan. this really reminded me that, when started the war, during war, and the end of the war, the Japan authority manipulate people and hide the truth. So this culture, this attitude, it has been continuing even to this covering the disaster of the Fukushima. This Fukushima man-made triple meltdown. They try to covering, but those hiding truth even make this Fukushima problems deeper and deeper. Even after 10 years, so many problems still piling up and still coming more problems. One problem is treated contaminated water released into the Pacific Ocean. It's very recently, April 13th this year, the government officially announced that they will release this contaminated water. It's about thousands of tanks of water in the Fukushima Daiichi lot, and so that is about 1.25 million tons of water. And then 70% of this water is still, even after treated by Alps, 70% of water is still high contaminated radioactive material, so that it is not safe, so that the government saying that they will treat more by any meaning, right? I think Alps again. But everybody knows, I think, the Alps cannot take off the tritium, but also 12 more different kind of radionuclide cannot also remove it. And so government and TEPCO said in 2 years they treat again and diluted this water by water and then dump to the ocean. But think about quantity of the nuclear radioactive are same. We are really concerned that these radioactive material accumulate in a part of the ocean and then affect to the environment, oceans, and then affect to the ocean lives and the human lives, right? So this is only one part of the problem. And also, let's see, children's thyroid cancer is, yes, definitely increasing. Recently in a medical journal by a German doctor with many data, he is proving that thyroid cancer in children in Fukushima 20 times more than the normal regular settings. Then the government is saying, and Fukushima prefecture is saying that because there is a too much checkup, too much vigorous checkup finding those cancer. So they want to decrease the checkup even at the school. And I just heard news video, one of victim children who is already 20 or 21, he had a thyroid cancer, removed one thyroid, not both, when he was 16 years old. He is very appreciated that have a checkup. Checkup found his condition, so he could have operation. If he didn't have the operation, he could be found, then maybe thyroid was too close to his vocal cord. He might lost the voice. So he's outrageous that government saying that the decreased checkup saved his life, he said. And I agree. And so those are another problem that government is try to hide. This, how do you call, fact that this Fukushima meltdown really caused those children died of the cancer, and they said no, it's no connection. Even still they said that. And another problem is so-called decontamination. The decontamination is they just flush down the water with their roof and the wall in the houses, and then they take off some top soil. Then they are asking to the evacuees to come back because this is safe, they said. But because, you know, that Japan raised the limitation of the exposure of the radiation is 1 millisievert per year to the 1 millisievert per year, right? To the 20 millisievert per year. Then so they said it's safe here. You have to come back. So they said they cut compensation because you can come back to safe area, but it is not really safe. More than 70% of Fukushima is mountain and forest and wood. Cannot decontaminate there, so that always rain and by wind. Radioactive materials come back, and there are hot spot, and the next day they monitored, and then much higher. So those places, government insisting to them to come back. So Fukushima, those problem is totally still there, and even the labor workers' health working at the plant and then in decommission, all the health problem. And then the decommission itself is after 10 years. The first government said maybe it takes 30 years, but I don't think so. It takes 50 years, and it could be for century to decommission those Fukushima. And then think about it, already Japan restarted next year, 2012, the Oi nuclear power plant. And now is 9 reactors are working, except 2 power plant in the annual checkup, but 7 are now in work. It's being operated. I cannot believe that, 2012 or 13, I think the Democratic Party, they said, nuclear power plant is seized by 2030. This hope was vanished by Liberal Democratic Party. It's gone. And then even Suga said 2050 will be no more CO2 emission and then clear energy. They are including for the nuclear power plant. Nuclear power plant isn't clean energy. It starts from digging the uranium and then transporting and then making the power, and then has the spent fuels. Where they go? It's old problems, but Japan is just doing unbelievable, like betraying Japanese people and betraying Fukushima victims, I think. Okay, so we have more speak out people, which is Tsukuru-san, Forest. She's founder of the Pacific Asian Nuclear Free Peace Alliance, also Nukes Action, Northern California. So I'd like to invite Tsukuru-san.
Hi, good afternoon. And I wrote out something, but I'm probably not going to speak from that. I'm just going to speak from my heart. So my name is Tsukuru Force. I am a founding member of Pacific Asian Nuclear Free Peace Alliance in LA. And I'm here with my friends in Northern California to speak out in protest of Japan's stance on nuclear weapons and also nuclear power plants, and also the Tokyo Olympics. So last time I was here with you guys, it was January 11th, 2020, the day after my dear friend Michiko Kato, a Fukushima evacuee, Fukushima survivor, passed away with a cancer, and I was filled with much grief, and that was what I spoke about on that day. Today, I'm here and I'm angry. I'm very angry about the mishandling, or shall I say, no handling of the situation in Fukushima by the Japanese government, and also, as I said, Japanese government stance on nuclear weapons. So this January, TPNW, Treaty on Nuclear Weapons Ban, passed. So in the international community, nuclear weapons are illegal. And Japan, who is a survivor of 2 nuclear attacks in 1945, refused to sign this treaty, which is insane and frankly an insult to Hiroshima and Nagasaki survivors. So I'm a graduate of a high school in Hiroshima where 350 students died by a nuclear attack in 1945, August 6, 1945. So I grew up with a lot of people. A lot of my friends knew someone or related to someone who survived or died in that nuclear attack. A lot of my teachers were survivors of Hiroshima bombing. So I speak from my personal experience and my personal relationships and my personal legacy, that what Japanese government is doing or not doing is really, as I said, an insult to the survivors. And I plead to the Japanese government now to sign TPNW and take a leadership position in the world to ban nuclear weapons forever. Yeah, and it is a shame, frankly, that the Japanese government is complicit in the United States stance on nuclear weapons. Anyway, but now let me speak about the Olympics, because I'm outraged that on June 11th, right now, 2021, we are still having this discussion about the Olympics. The Tokyo Olympics should not happen, and we should never have won the bid to the Olympics. The Tokyo Olympics, the idea of Tokyo Olympics was founded upon lies and greed. So I'm just gonna quote what happened. So in 2013, in Rio, Brazil, former Prime Minister of Japan, Shinzo Abe, stated, in the Olympics bid speech that, let me assure you, the situation in Fukushima is under control. It has never done or will do any damage to Tokyo. So he spoke these words in front of the whole world. The apparent lies, right? So the Japanese government lied to the whole world to win the Olympics. And Olympics was, given to Japan. And that was wrong. So it was, it was labeled as the recovery Olympics, right? Because it was to promote this idea of the situation in Fukushima is done and dealt with, which is a complete lie. I mean, as Steve and as Chizu-san spoke previously, almost nothing has been done to mend the situation with the plant. Like any of the fuel rods have not been taken out. And frankly, I do not think that there is, or they do not have a plan to clean up the plant. Also, as Chizu-san mentioned, people in and around Fukushima are suffering. There are thousands, if not tens of thousands, displaced, lost their home, and they will not be able to go back to their hometown. Oh, thank you so much, 50,000. So yeah, they will not be able to go back to their hometowns ever. So, it is really an outrage that Japan is going through with this Olympics in the middle of the pandemic. As Steve said, a lot of people have died and are dying. A lot of people are ending up on the streets because they lost their jobs, lost their home. In October of 2020, the number of suicides among Japanese women went up by 83%. 83%. Like let that sink in. So with the nuclear disaster and also with this pandemic, who is taking the most damage? Who is being hurt? Women and children. And it is a shame. It is criminal for Japanese government not to cancel the Olympics. But let me just express my anger and frustration with the IOC, International Olympics Committee. So let me just quote this. So John Coates, an IOC vice president, said that the games would proceed even if the host city was still under a state of emergency. And Thomas Bach, the IOC president, said the athletes definitely can make their Olympics dreams come true. We have to make some sacrifices to make this possible. What do you mean by that? Sacrifices? Whose sacrifices? Are they saying that Japanese people have to sacrifice their lives, and actually the athletes have to risk their lives to, make this Olympic happen? And then the IOC went on to say that even if the Japanese Prime Minister Suga said no to the Olympics, they will still proceed with the Olympics. This proves to me that the IOC is an imperialist organization, and they only care about money and profit, and they do not care about the concerns of ordinary people. So today, I am pleading and demanding to the Japanese government in front of this San Francisco Consulate General that please cancel the Tokyo Olympics and spend money where it's needed. Spend the money to house and feed the poor and displaced, because that's what Japan needs right now. Thank you so much. Let me introduce you to my dear friend Eric Curry, who is running for Congress in CA12, San Francisco. And I met him about 3 months ago, I guess, virtually. And this time, this week I met him for the first time in person. He's impressed me and moved my heart because he is one of the, among the younger generations who is willing to take a stand against nukes, both nuclear weapons and nuclear power generation, nuclear power plants. So I'm very excited that he's here to express, his opposition over the release of wastewater in Fukushima.
I'm going to speak from my experience, from my heart. Thank you for the opportunity. Like Sukru mentioned, my name is Eric Curry. I'm running for Congress here in California's 12th District. I have some remarks for the Japanese government, also our government, But before I speak with my prepared statement for them, I want to take us back exactly 1 year ago when we were in the middle of the pandemic. Uncertainty, fear over what was going to happen. Nobody knew what was going to happen. We didn't know how we were going to support our families. Now, imagine that fear and that uncertainty drawn out over 10 years. And this is what the farmers and the fishermen in the Fukushima area have had to deal with ever since what happened in 2011 in the nuclear plant. They have had to use their own money to test the water to prove that their catch is safe. Government has an obligation to take care of its people. With that being said, I am calling on the Japanese government to do something, to come up with an environmentally friendly solution to not just dump the contaminated water into the Pacific Ocean, but to come up with an environmentally friendly solution. I'm calling on our congressional leaders to collaborate with Prime Minister Suga and his administration, because there are no winners in a nuclear war. And the thing is, folks, this is not just a Japanese problem. Mothers for Peace, a group out of San Luis Obispo, California, has been testing the water off the coast of California in San Luis Obispo, and they have found overwhelmingly that the radiation caused all the way on the other side of the world in Fukushima has reached us here in California. This is a global catastrophe. This affects us. So finally, I come to you, I plead to you as a member of the next generation. President Biden, your latest budget included $30 billion for new nuclear weapons. Have we not learned from the atrocities of the past? What have we learned? The earth does not belong to us. It belongs to our children. So we better start acting like it, because there is no planet B. We all share the oceans, we all share the earth. And there are no winners in a nuclear war, which is why I am unashamedly calling on our congressional leaders, calling on our community leaders, calling on every single person with a pulse to advocate for a nuclear-free future. The only kind of good nukes are no nukes. Thank you.
Thanks for the great speakers. Konnichiwa. My name is Dwight. I lived in Sendai for a while, so I have a couple of questions. And I mean, this is an example of capitalism run amok. That's, you know, and there is no true democracy anywhere, really, if you think about it. 80% of the Japanese people don't want the Olympics. They don't want nukes. Doesn't matter. It's all about making money. So I have a couple of questions, maybe Steve or whoever can answer. Are they having any of the vents in irradiated areas? Near Fukushima, are they having any events in the Olympics in areas that were contaminated? And also, are any athletes anywhere boycotting the Olympics?
Recently, the New York activist Inoue-san organized a letter to Consulate General of Japan in New York with 70 U.S. groups, and then send a letter. So this time we asked, let's see, Carol Suehiro. No. I'm very sorry, Carol-san, sorry, Hisasue-san. Carol Hisasue. She offered to write a letter to Prime Minister Suga for today. And she's, again, Eric just mentioned that she's San Luis Obispo Mothers for Peace, who they are doing for the research of the water from ocean for the radiation level. It's really tremendous high. So already the California ocean is contaminated. So unfortunately, Carol Hisasue-san cannot be here today. Hisasue. So Yoko Clark will read it out. And then we already sent this letter to San Francisco General of Consulate with Inoue-san's letter together. So Yoko-san, please.
Okay, so this was written by Carol. I'm just going to read it for her. She says, to Prime Minister Suga, it has been 10 years and 3 months since the start of the nuclear disaster at Fukushima Daiichi. Despite the fact that the facility has yet to be contained, refugees are scattered throughout Japan as well as abroad. Contaminated water keeps building up, and a country has a pandemic to deal with. Your government has bought its way into hosting the ill-fated 2020 Olympics, and you insist that it must go on. Just as troubling was the announcement that you will start releasing the approximately 1.25 million metric tons of radioactive water into the Pacific Ocean within 2 years. Recently, a letter signed by 70 U.S. groups was delivered to the Consulate General of Japan in New York, protesting and strongly condemning this decision. I'm attaching this letter for your reference. We in California are especially angered by this decision as we share the same Pacific Ocean, an ocean that provides livelihood to fishermen, recreation for water sports enthusiasts, solace and enjoyment for beach lovers, and most importantly, home to an abundance of marine life. This ocean belongs to all of us. It is not yours to pollute with irradiated water. It is a violation of international law. Since 2014, Mothers for Peace has been collecting local water samples from the Central California coast to be tested for radiation, cesium-137 in particular, by the Woodhull Oceanographic Institution. The graph shows just how level have gone up, and that dilution is not the solution to this kind of pollution. I'm going to show you the graph that she attached. So this is a graph that shows how it spiked in the year 2018. It's a level of cesium-137 in Central California, and so if you're interested, I can show it to you, but this is what it is. So she says the alternatives such as building larger tanks on site. We call on the Japanese government to explore these options and to reverse the decision to release the radioactive contamination. Sincerely, Carol Hisasue, San Luis Obispo, Mothers of Peace.
We can say, and a question was asked earlier about whether or not the Olympics are going to take place in Fukushima. Yes, they are. The Zumi Stadium, which was built for the baseball tournament, and it will take place. And for those who don't know, Fukushima is an agricultural wild area. There are mountains there, and there are thousands, tens of thousands of bags of contaminated waste still in Fukushima. Now, you say you cleaned it up. Why are these bags of contaminated waste still in Fukushima? You have to ask that question. Do you want to live next to a contaminated bag of waste from a radioactive explosion? That's what the people of Fukushima have to suffer with. And they're being ordered by the government to go back there, pretend it doesn't exist. Well, Prime Minister Suga and Abe are not living next to bags of contaminated waste. You can believe that, but they want the people, the farmers and the workers of Fukushima, to live next to these bags of contaminated waste. What the government has said, and this is the mentality, the reactionary capitalist mentality of the government, is that they said, well, since there was a disaster in Fukushima, everybody should share the pain. So what we're going to do is we're going to take these bags of contaminated waste and require in the prefectures for them to use them in road construction, spread out the waste all over the country. This is our way of everyone taking responsibility for what happened in Fukushima. Well, the real responsibility are the criminals who built that plant. The criminals who built the plant and did not have it properly protected, the criminals who fired Kei Sugaaki, who said that there were health and safety problems at that plant. He was retaliated against. So health and safety whistleblowers and workers who've complained about the dangers of that plant are retaliated against by the government of Japan, General Electric, which built that nuclear facility. So we can say that there's criminality involved and corruption. It's not just a bad accident that took place. People were criminally involved in covering it up, refusing to spend the money. And TEPCO, which is now really controlled by the Japanese government, has brought in tens of thousands of contract workers, many of them from other countries, to clean up the plant. These workers are getting contaminated. Are they going to be protected when they get cancer? Hell no. They're going to be on their own. So what we're seeing is destruction of lives, destruction of the environment, and the use of labor workers to be brought in to supposedly clean up, which they haven't been able to do. And these workers are getting contaminated. They will suffer, they will get cancer, and they will be on their own because the Japanese government will refuse to take care of them. And that is another crime that we can see that's taking place right today. And we have to say that Congresswoman Pelosi here in San Francisco has supported funding for these Olympics. She has not spoken out against holding the Olympics. She's head of the Congress, the chair of the House Democrats. She's not opposing the Olympics. She's in favor of more tax dollars going to the Olympics. Why is that? She has also supported more military funding for nuclear weapons. Congresswoman Pelosi. So we have somebody in San Francisco, the quote-unquote liberal San Francisco, who's in favor of more money for nuclear weapons, who's in favor of more money for the Olympics, who is supporting U.S. encirclement of China, more militarization, the Henoko base in Okinawa, which the people do not want. They don't want a base in Okinawa. They're being terrorized, the people of Okinawa, by helicopters and jets flying over their homes in the evening at all times of day. Imagine that. More than 70 years after the war in Japan, the United States is still terrorizing not only people of Okinawa, but the people of Tokyo. The United States controls the airspace of Tokyo, and they're having helicopter and jet flights over. They control the airspace of Japan. I mean, can you imagine that? After many decades, and the government, the venal government of Japan goes along with that. The United States can do whatever they want in Japan. They can continue to support military flights in Okinawa. They can continue to have nuclear weapons in Japan, which they did illegally, even though they signed in the U.S.-Japan agreement that there would be no nuclear weapons. They brought nuclear weapons to Okinawa. The people of Japan are against nuclear weapons because they've experienced themselves and their families the destructive dangers of nuclear weapons and the bombing in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But this government is really a criminal government. And really the working people of Japan have to remove it. It is doing no good. And I think the corruption that's being illuminated in this Olympics, the conflicts of interest, is another example of a government out of control. And we can say today that these governments that are backing it, the G7 are backing having the Olympics in the middle of a pandemic, are criminal governments. Why would they have people suffer and get COVID and they can't even take care of the people with their healthcare system? It shows to me that these governments really should be prosecuted for what they're doing to the people of Japan, the people of the world. And we say no more putting over 1 million tons of radioactive water in the ocean. No silence by Congresswoman Pelosi, who supposedly represents the people of San Francisco. That contamination. That radioactive water will end up in San Francisco, off the coast of San Francisco. Complete silence. Let's close our eyes and pretend this is not happening. This is another example of denialism. Let's not talk about it because we don't want to affect what is going on in Japan. We don't want to say to these companies and these governments, you can't do this. You can't contaminate the oceans. You can't contaminate the world with radioactive contamination from nuclear accident, man-made nuclear accident in Fukushima. So we're saying today to the Japanese government, we will be back here July 11th, but July 23rd, the Olympics is starting, and there will be actions. We will be back, and we will let people know, no to the Olympics, no to nuclear weapons. We demand an end to restarting the nuclear plants and justice for the people who have been contaminated and sickened by the Fukushima disaster. Thank you.
One thing that government says that they don't ask TEPCO when they release the dumping water 2 years after. They don't ask how much quantity and then what kind of radionuclide they release. Government will not ask, so we don't know. It's outrageous, right? Okay, we should really keep on having our anger, keep on angry, and then we really cannot forget Fukushima. So we will be here again July 11th at 3 p.m. in front of the San Francisco Japanese Consulate. No more nukes!